Good evening, everybody. My name is E.R. Anderson. I'm the executive director of Karis Circle. Karis Circle is a nonprofit programming arm of Karis Books, and Karis Books is the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore. We are so honored to be here tonight with Sinister Wisdom and the Lesbian History Archives to welcome Irena Klepfisz in conversation with Julie Enszer for a celebration and reading of Her Birth and Later Years, New and Selected Poems, 1971 to 2021. Sinister Wisdom is a multicultural lesbian literary and art journal that publishes 4 issues a year. Publishing since 1976, Sinister Wisdom works to create a multicultural, multi-class lesbian space. The Lesbian History Archives exist to gather and preserve records of lesbian lives and activities. The Lesbian History Archives is home to the world's largest collection of materials by and about lesbians and their communities. It's a great honor to be here with both of those esteemed organizations and to be here with our friend Julie Enszer, who is more responsible, we were just talking in the green room, for bringing important books that we love into circulation, new and reissued books. And Julie is like a one-woman band beating the drum for our culture. And it's such an honor to be here with you tonight, Julie. So Julie is the author of 4 poetry collections, including Avowed, and the editor of The Complete Works of Pat Parker and Sister Love, the letters of Audre Lorde and Pat Parker, 1974 to 1989. She edits and publishes Sinister Wisdom, the multicultural lesbian literary and art journal. She is the co-editor of Outright, the speeches that shaped LGBTQ literary culture, and she currently lives in Central Florida. So I'm going to pass it over to you, but on behalf of Karis, it's wonderful to have such a huge crowd here tonight celebrating one of our favorite poets, longtime Karis favorite poet. So one of the big gifts of an otherwise very hard time is that we get to do these virtual events. And so it's a real honor to gather with folks from all over the world. So thank you all for being here. Thank you, especially Irena. What a wonderful opportunity for us to get to gather in your honor.
Thank you. Thank you so much, ER. Good evening and welcome to the over 100 people gathered with us today. I want to thank ER, also the Lesbian History Archives, and really the entire gang at Karis Books and more. It's a delight to collaborate with these 2 organizations on events. And I thank everybody for joining us this evening. You already are, but drop your comments in the chat. And as we go through and luxuriate through this evening together, feel free to drop questions as well, which I will bring to Irena. We have a simple plan for this evening. I'm going to introduce Irena at a bit of length, unlike my usual introductions, which are really just like, here is rock star lesbian of the world, which we could also say about Irena, but I'm going to give a little bit more because I want to have a personal moment to pay homage to her and her work. Then she's going to read to us for about 15 or 20 minutes. And then we have a short video of artwork that's meaningful to Irena and the book, Her Birth and Later Years, which I will hold up right here. Then Irena and I will have a conversation and I'll bring the questions from the group that's gathered. We'll wrap up in about 60 to 70 minutes. If you have not already, I encourage you to purchase Her Birth and Later Years tonight from Karis Books and More. There's a link right on the screen below us. It makes a difference when you support our beloved feminist, lesbian, queer, anti-racist, progressive bookstore, Karis Books and More. And when you buy from them, you will also get a copy of the book that is signed by Irena herself with a book plate. It's really beautiful. You want to have this as a keepsake. So take a moment to buy at least 1 copy of the book for yourself, and ideally one or more for a few beloved others that you might share with. Now to introduce Irena. And I'm going to start with one of my favorite lines from her poem. Yes, it is true. I am a keeper of accounts. This line from Irena Klepfish's poem, Bashert, was a mantra to me while I was writing my dissertation. I wanted to become a keeper of accounts of lesbian feminist poetry and lesbian feminist culture. I also wanted to meet Irena Klepfisz, though it would not happen until after my dissertation was completed. We met in the process of publishing Sinister Wisdom 119, To Be a Jewish Dyke in the 21st Century. Irena was a contributor to this issue, edited by Alana Dykewoman, now of blessed memory, and Judith Katz, who is with us this evening. I cooked up the idea of doing a Zoom tribute to Irena, and she graciously agreed. Around that same time, Shramona Mundal and I interviewed Irena for an issue that we did about the lesbian feminist journal Conditions. Then one day, Irena and I were talking on the telephone. We've actually never met in the physical embodiment. And she said, I have these poems. Friends, my heart leapt into the air. New poems by Irena Klepfisz. Now, I tried to repress my excitement and play it cool. New poems, I said? I'd love to see them. And by some blessed convergence of luck and trust and goodwill, Irena shared them with me. And of course, I wanted to publish all of these poems as a Sapphic classic through Sinister Wisdom. But I also wanted Irena to receive recognition and accolades in the broader world for her years of work. And Rachel Levitsky helped facilitate the connection with Wesleyan University Press, which brought this beautiful hardcover book into being. Now, we all know Irena as a poet from her 4 earlier books of poetry, Periods of Stress, Keeper of Accounts, Different Enclosures, A Few Words in the Mother Tongue. We also know her as a formidable essayist and intellectual from her collected prose, Dreams of an Insomniac. Many of us also know her as an editor. She co-edited with Melanie K. Kantrowitz, The Tribe of Dinah, a Jewish women's anthology. And of course, Tribe of Dinah was originally issued as an issue of Sinister Wisdom. But there is still more. Irena is also one of the foremost advocates of the Yiddish language and of the recovery of Yiddish women writers. She's recovered the voices of many writers and was one of the organizers of Die Freuen, a 1995 conference on women and Yiddish, where Irena was the keynote speaker, and she riveted the audience with the story of the Jewish Labor Bundist, Anna Heller Rosenthal, who she described as revolutionary, socialist, worker organizer, educator, Yiddishist, and feminist. Who else does that sound like but Irena herself? I like to imagine Anna Heller Rosenthal joining us here this evening. Irena has published widely recently with appearances in Geveb, Jewish Currents, the Manhattan Review, and the Georgia Review, and more. She recently retired after 22 years of teaching Jewish women's studies at Barnard College. So across 3 centuries, Anna Heller Rosenthal, Irena Klepfisz, and now all of us gathered here this evening are kindred spirits. At 10 years old, in Irena's telling and from her translation, Anna sought to be useful to the world and to be in the movement. She achieved that yearning. So did Irena. It's my pleasure to invite Irena to read to us this evening from her new book. Today is the actual publication date, her birth and later years, New and Collected Poems, 1971 to 2021. Irena.
Julie, can you hear me? You can hear me? That's overwhelming. Well, thank you so much. I don't know why, but I'm usually embarrassed, but thank you, Julie. That was beautiful. And thank you, Errol, and thank you, Karis Books and More, and thank you, the Lesbian History Archives. I remember doing readings when Keeper of Accounts first came out in Jones and Deb's apartment on the Upper West Side, and came with the book and started reading. So this feels really, having people, the archives here is also feels really, really wonderful. I'm going to read a sort of mishmash of poems that are very new and ones that are kind of old. And I'm going to read a bunch of them, and then Julie has some surprise questions for me, and I'll try to answer them. Okay, I'm going to begin with a poem that Julie actually sort of requested to be the first one that she really liked. It's from the newer section of the book. It's called "The Old Poet Remembers the Immigrant Girl." From the start, the chorus always said, "We don't want what you have to give. We don't care who you are. You have to become different. Change." When she first walked into class and pledged with the wrong hand, they all chorused. She stood mute, ashamed, as the teacher corrected her, still mute when they chorused the incomprehensible sounds. After a time, she understood that girls would talk behind her back about her ugly stockings, the bows in her hair, the braids too tightly braided. It was all noise and dust and cars and loneliness, a mother at work, a glass of milk, a sandwich waiting on the kitchen table. Everyone whispered. She was no one's friend. They locked her in a closet until her mother came home and claimed her. She learned she would be outside, that people would stop speaking to her and not tell her, that there was always a struggle to be in, which meant that someone always had to be out. She was dressed in humiliation and homemade skirts by the mother who had no husband. Once in class, the teacher asked them to tell what their father did, and at her turn, she stood mute again because she could not bring herself to say, "He is dead. My father is dead. He has always been dead." The words were only sounds, for her memory was blank, but they were sounds she could not risk. So she stood mute again until the teacher asked, "Do you have a father?" And she shook her head in shame, in fear, and sat down. She learned nothing they wanted her to know, but everything else about being alone, about keeping it close to her heart, about silence, about how her own words rebounded in her silence, about how she could use them, but only if she remained on the outside. This next poem came out of a trip that Judy and I took to Maine for vacation a number of years ago. It's called Grief, Brunswick Public Library, Maine. At the library, the woman with the broken English is broken, and so she wails, cracking the comforting silence. Everyone stops at the computers, along the orderly shelves, at the children's desk, where the papier-mâché animals seem to be drained of their colors, as if the sound had washed them in tears. She clutches a small girl and weeps, her arms tight around the child, while a librarian tries to calm her. It's an old story. Her husband left, simply left, for the West Coast, for Singapore, Canada, for a job just down the highway in Harpswell. Perhaps she has no home to go to. Perhaps she'll kill herself and the child. She wails. The librarians huddle and call the police, and the police call for an ambulance. I think about the child, her fear, the father gone, and soon the mother too. For who will risk her with this woman? Who will risk the mother's pounding heart, her terror, her realization that she is alone on this unfathomable continent in a library with so many atlases and answers, and not one to translate an abandoned woman awash in grief. This is, there was a period where I wrote a whole bunch of flower poems. I'm going to sort of drop them in between certain poems tonight. I wrote them sort of under the impression that nothing could, thinking, or at least the challenge that nothing could grow in New York City. They're just flower poems. This one's called Oleander. A gift from a lover when things were definitely going downhill. It's poisonous, she said. No known antidotes. After the breakup, long after, when I'd already settled down with someone else, I boarded it with my mother, who's always taught, never throw anything out. Whenever I see it, I'm drawn again to the dissembling innocence among the dark green jade and purple passion. I long to taste one leaf, one petal, to test that warning. For nothing, I tell myself, not even death could be that final. You must understand, it is more than mortal resistance. For there was a time when she left, and I knew, was fiercely certain, this departure was the last. The painting on the cover of my book is by my late partner, Judith Waterman, who died about 8 years ago. Judy was a very, very devoted painter, and she tried to structure her life so that she could paint during the day and only work at night. This didn't always work out that way, and sometimes she was forced to take 9-to-5 jobs. And I wrote this poem at one of these times when I went to pick her up at the end of the day and sort of saw her struggling there. She was transcribing some kind of a tape. It was a secretarial job. And she was obviously not painting. And so this is a poem called A Poem for Judy Beginning a New Job. I will keep this simple, not give it universal significance, nor transform it into art. You say, I will not do this forever. I will paint. I've learned now that it's no solace to point out the others, so many others straining, wasting, unable to do what they know they must do. For such loss is always solitary and unshared, outside the scope of bloodless theory. You do not paint, and what must happen does not happen. The transformation of the empty canvas of the elusive marble into the shadowy water, or of the simple water into impenetrable rock. And nothing, not even a loving embrace, nor special intimate midnight talk, will ever make up or diminish that loss for you, or for her, or her, or her. The next two poems I'm going to read are about sort of my response after Judy died. This first one, kind of almost immediately after she died. It's called Parsing the Question, and it's sort of, you have to sort of infer what the question is. Parsing the question. Forget the common words and answer instead. I found a dead mouse under the cabinet, stiff and curled in a fetal position. The flowers in the vase are now powder dusting the books in the bookcase. Where the bed stood, two chairs face each other, ready for conversation. The new mystery on TV. When I turn the key, I hold my breath. Will King Rat be at the table banging for his portion of cheese? Sometimes I too sit down and bang for my cheese. Sometimes I turn on the TV, open another book. Often I lie down and tell myself, This is a nightmare. I will wake up. When I met Judy, she had a house up, and she already had bought a house up in the country. And we ended up, during the time we had together, the decades we spent together, spending a lot of time up there. The last 4 years of Judy's life, she was just too sick for us to go up there. It's like a 4-hour trip by car. And so we essentially abandoned the house. And a month after she died, in July, I drove up there by myself for the first time. And this is sort of the reaction I had to that trip, that first trip without her. It's called This House. And there's a reference in this poem to privets. Privets are very common bushes that all of you have seen. You just don't know the name of it. They're usually used to mark off property between lawns or between houses. But they're just very common bushes. They're called privets. This house. After 4 years, I returned to this peace, this empty space with its painted, spattered floor, grateful that you let me in when you were so afraid another presence would overwhelm it. There are so many ghosts. You would be sad. Dave's mini market is gone. So is the country store. Also the grocery in the next town, though the bagel place keeps on across the road from the Sunday flea market. I drove on the back road and it's paved now. Almost didn't recognize that hunting lodge. 4 walls with a roof, and now a live-in house. That bicycle dangling from the tree above that silly pond, gone. The pig farmer's barn is locked. Remember those noisy little piglets, how he held them by their legs so we could see them up close? No trace of them, so freshly pink, running nowhere down the dirt path. And the woman with the goats, she's gone too. As is the flaming lavender trailer where 2 women lived, and we never did get beyond our own suspicions. For whom could we have asked? You knew the name of every insignificant road at every turn, and I'm trying to remember your roots and stop now at the place where you wanted me to cut some purple flowers, still wild blooming on a bank. Today I placed a few in that small green vase. The truth, the house needs mending, so long neglected, it needs your care. I'm trying to channel you, repairing clapboards, the broken well cover, the broken steps. You may be gone, but are always with me. We're 2 ghosts, joined. And when I clear the roses, when I cut the strangling vines, I can hear you whisper, go help the privets. Let the privets breathe. This is another flower poem, Winter Light. Almost in December, indifferent to seasons, the marigolds persist. I'm surprised by their pluck and lack of propriety, their ability to ignore the inappropriate, a rusted leaking window box, a shaky fire escape leading to a cemented street below. They do not mourn that all good things must come to an end and accept that end as fate or destiny. Instead, without struggle or assessment of soil, moisture, heat, air, they continue blooming in chilling winter light, exactly as they did all summer. The next poem is titled for Jean Swallow, whom I barely knew. I don't know how many people here today know the name Jean Swallow. She's a writer, a lesbian, and with a number of books. And she did also, as Julie told me, publish in Sinister Wisdom. I met her when she was working with Jeff Manasseh, a photographer, and they were doing a book called Making Love Visible, a celebration of gay and lesbian families. And this was in '96, so this was very radical at the time. She was doing, Jean was doing the interviews, and Jeff was doing the photography. And they were almost completely finished. Judy, I, and my mother were sort of the last interview I believe that they had done, or that Jean had done, when she committed suicide. And this is the poem for her. For Jean Swallow, whom I barely knew, in memory of Jean Swallow, lesbian writer, September 8th, 1953, January 16th, 1995. Here's what you've missed, and it's only been 2 days. The earthquake in Japan, the recovery in California, short-lived, the official declaration of war on affirmative action, my last letter to you with suggestions and questions. Now everyone feels guilty. If only I hadn't yelled, if only I had written sooner, if only I'd been more welcoming, if only I'd given in, as if each of us were responsible and you a mere onlooker, a manipulated victim of your own suicide. It's hard to imagine anything less passive. The repeated gestures, 300 aspirins, swallowing handfuls, washing each down, then swallowing another again and again. And yet your last letter just a few days before was full of hope and the future, a novel taking shape each night, poetry shimmering for the time being on the back of a dream, both vague and shortly before that, you were visiting New York and you talked of a prose poem rejected by some who said, this is not how a poem should look. Where should the lines end, you had asked? And then the eternal, what is poetry after all? I replied, the only thing I knew. Our poems are like our lives, sometimes carefully crafted, but mostly haphazard, shaped by unleashed instinctual needs we barely recognize, much less understand. A poem is totally your own, I advised. Stick by it, ignore what others say. I remember that day's conversation. We were walking aimlessly, oblivious of city streets, only vaguely concentrating on looking for your car, which you'd forgotten was parked where? I've talked poetry to others. Some barely listen. Perhaps you listened too hard and shaped your poems like a series of bottles fitted to the palm of your hand. But at the time, the talk seemed to bring a breath of relief. Yes, I said, I must remember that. Now I must remember. In the matter of suicide, nothing we do, we who go on living, matters much. The postponed letter, the unspoken wise advice. You needed to die, didn't worry what would happen 2 days later, indifferent to the difference between wraparound prose and the rest of us, lover, collaborator, old friend, or recent acquaintance. We choose to live on. Your suicide, neither guilty excuse nor hard lesson for the lives we lead or may decide to take. I'm going to just read 2 more poems, and they both happen to be about words. So, Etla haverta oif mama lashon, a few words in the mother tongue. Lamashal, for example, dikuva, the whore, a woman who acknowledges her passions. Die Yidina, the Jewish woman, ignorant, overbearing. Let's face it, every woman is one. Die Yenta, the gossip, the busy who knows what's what and is never caught off guard. Die Lesbianke, the one with a roommate, though we never use the word. Das Weibel, the wife or the little woman. In der Heim, at home, where she does everything to keep Yiddishkeit alive. Yiddishkeit, a way of being Jewish, always arguable. In Mark, where she buys die Kartoffel and challah, yes, potatoes and challah, die Kartoffel, the material counterpart of Yiddishkeit. Mit Sibboleth, with onions that bring Tränen zu die Augen, tears to her eyes when she sees how little it all is. Weniger und weniger, less and less. Die Challah, braided wie ihr Haar vor der Hasana, like her hair before the wedding when she was a schön Mädel, such a pretty girl. Die lange schwarze Haar, the long black hair, die lange schwarze Haar. A Frau träumt, a woman dreams ihr Ort auf der Welt, her place in this world, und sie hat Meure, and she is afraid, so afraid of the words kurva, Yidina, Yenta, Lesbianke, Weibel. Sie träumt, she dreams, und sie hat Meure, and she is afraid, ihr Ort, die Welt, die Heim, der Mark, a Mädel Holland, a Kurve Holland, a Yidina Holland, a Yenta Holland, a Lesbianke Holland, a Weibel Holland, die Kartoffel, die Halle, Yiddishkeit, sie Holland, die Haar, die lange schwarze Haar, sie Holland, sie Holland, sie Holland. And this is the last poem, and it has an epigraph which I copied exactly from a sign in the Brooklyn Botanic Garden. I thought that the sign itself should win a literary Pulitzer Prize. It's quite amazing, but I'm going to read it to you. I'm going to read it to you in their entirety, and then read my own poem. Where do new varieties come from? General Eisenhower is a red tulip which was first recognized in 1951. In 1957, a lemon yellow mutation appeared in a field of red General Eisenhower tulips. This yellow mutation proved to be a stable sport, which was called Royal Pearl. Royal Pearl. In dead of winter, imprisoned within the imprisoned earth, it was a leap defiant of all eternal laws and patterns. Beneath the frozen earth, it came to be like a splitting of an inner will, a wrenching from a designated path, a sudden burst from a cause unknown. And then in spring, it opened, a lemon yellow in a pure red field. Our words deny the simple beauty, the wild energy of the event, anomaly, deviant, mutant, we're always taught, as though this world were a finished place and we the dull guardians of its perfected forms. Our lives are rooted in such words. Yet each winter there are some who watch the gardens emptied, only white, as the snow presses on the fenced-in grounds, just as on an unclaimed field. And each winter there are some who dream of a splitting of an inner will, a wrenching from a designated path, who dream a purple flower standing solitary in a yellow field.
Thank you so much, Irena. That was wonderful and such a great pleasure to hear you read. Now, to give Irena a brief moment to catch her breath and have a sip of water, we're going to see a slideshow that lasts about 1 minute with artwork by Irena's longtime lover and partner, Judith Waterman. And it has in the background a Nagoon by Isle of Klesbos. And I believe Eve Secular is here with us this evening. So thank you for the beautiful Eve music. We'll show it first to folks as a film, and then Irene and I are going to talk a bit about a few of the images. So ER, we're ready for the slideshow whenever it happens.
What happened? Something happened.
I heard a sigh.
Mm.
It looks like Karis Books and More is having it like dropped out for a moment and is looking to reconnect. I understand that there are big rainstorms in Atlanta right now, so they may be having some of those issues.
Why don't we just
So,
talk?
Irene, do you want to take? Well, we can certainly just talk and circle back. Oh, here we go. Just as we thought.
No sound.
I know my colleague Sierra is here this evening, who does technology stuff for Sinister Wisdom. And I know that they are thinking right now, oh, I'm so glad that I'm not the person driving the technology because it's so stressful when it's happening. I also wanted to lift up some people knew or remembered Jean Swallow in the conversation. And another Sinister Wisdom volunteer who works with us a lot, Max, is doing a bunch of research into Jean's work and writings. So hopefully we're going to publish something. Thank you so much. ER, you can pull up the painting that's on the cover of Her Birth and Later Years to share. That's the first image we're going to talk about, and I want people to have a chance to see it a little bit. So, so first, Irena, will you tell us a little bit about this image?
Yeah.
And, yes. Tell the image from the cover of the book.
Oh, well, this, if you can show that next image with the distant image of the painting, just go back and forth, just show that and then come back to this, the one that's right after this. Yeah, this is how large the painting on the cover is. As you can see, it's this size, so it's a monstrously big coffin. We can come back if we can come back to that. Judy went through a very difficult, all kinds of problems, and sort of what we now call a dark period. And she was sort of coming out of it, and she did a number of kind of paintings, these very large, huge paintings that had to do with death or funerals or whatever, but they were in much lighter tone than the previous work. And she didn't usually title her paintings. I called this The Happy Coffin. And she really liked that title, even though that's not really the title. But it is, it was my number one choice for the cover because I thought it was so wacky, but I was actually afraid to submit it to Wesleyan. And my friend Zoe Kelman said that I said, I'm not even going to send it. She said, well, why not? I mean, all they can do is reject it. And so I did. I sent one slide and they just loved it right away. And it became, they never saw anything else and they worked with it. So I was very, very pleased. Yeah, her paintings are she has about 24 paintings that are that size, room size. I mean, if anybody knows of any museum curators or people looking to discover a great artist, please be in touch.
Yes, because you're the executor for her work and doing a catalog and getting it out there, in addition to, of course, writing your poems and publishing your book.
Yes. I want to try to see what we can do with her work.
Yeah. So you spent a good part, a substantial amount of time partnered with a visual artist. Did that influence your writing?
Yeah, I think it influenced. I mean, I think Judy in general, just as a role model, when I met Judy, I'd sort of never met quite anybody like her before. She was fiercely committed to her work. And, you know, I had been sort of raised like you can dream anything you want to dream, but you have to have a fallback, you know, and you have to fall back on something. And I fell back on my Ph.D., which actually in the end did me no good at all. But Judy had nothing. I mean, she had an BA, but she was totally devoted to her work. And she came to New York from the Midwest in the early 60s. And she worked part-time jobs at night and painted during the day. And that was a real pattern for her. With few exceptions. There were a couple of years, I mean, when we were together where she just had to take a job from 9 to 5. But afterwards, when we came back to the city, we lived in the country for a while. She took jobs teaching basically ESL and GED at night to immigrants through DC 37 in New York. So she did a lot of, these were union people who were getting free kind of classes. And so she loved doing that, but the point of it was that she could work during the day and paint. And that kind of devotion, I think, to her art was really an example to me. It was not the tradition that I was very familiar with. That in itself. And also, you know, I have to confess that I just didn't look at things before I met Judy. I mean, Judy and I would go to some place, a party, let's say, and I would come out and I would say to her, did you hear what this person said of this or that or that? And she'd say no. And then she would say, did you see how the ceiling was shaped at the thing? So it was like we would have two different experiences. So she made me look in a way that I had never looked before. And she taught me actually a great deal about art. One of my favorite things was to go with Judy to an art museum and ask her, well, tell me why this is a great piece of work. And she would lecture me. And so I really learned an enormous amount. And she wanted me to keep writing. She was a real supporter of my work. And she sometimes thought I was distracted too easily and I was running off to do too many other things. So she would pull me back or try to pull me back. So she had an enormous influence on me. I mean, I think in terms of the way I approached my work. And she also became a very good editor of my essays. So I trusted her for that.
That's great. So yeah, we'll just show briefly the image of the Sinister Wisdom cover. That's the feature. That's Judy's work. There it is.
There's I have the issue, actually. This was very unusual because these were etchings that she did. She did very few of them, and she rarely just did black and white like that. And Melanie K. Kantrowitz was the editor at the time, and she wanted to put it on the cover. And so Judy got on the cover of Sinister Wisdom 31. I think it was in 87 or something, like 1987. It was a while back. Yeah, it's nice. I like it.
That's great. Thank you. I think we're done with the slideshows. So that's interesting. You know, you talk about, and you're not the first poet or writer that I've heard talk about their partner also having an artistic discipline that sort of influenced how they think about their work and how they do their work. So I wonder if you would tell me a little bit about what is your writing process? How do you start a poem?
How do you start a poem? Well, usually with great pain, because usually, you know, when you start, I mean, you've had, maybe you haven't, but I suspect you have. You have this experience where you see something or feel it. You almost feel the words, and then you put it down on paper, and it looks like a mess. You know, you had this perfect idea, and it's so painful to look at what's on the page, and you have to start working on it. So, I mean, it's sort of interesting. I don't really have a complete answer. I will tell you this, that I don't know if you've had this experience. Do sometimes people tell you, oh, you should write a poem about that? It drives me crazy. It really drives me crazy. People say, oh, I'm together with a group of people and something happens and they say, oh, you should write a poem about that. And I think, why don't you write the poem about that? Why should I write the poem about that? And besides, I think it's interesting. Now, if they said maybe you could write about this and there'd be something about an essay or something, that would make more sense. I don't think I've ever written anything when somebody says, I think you should write a poem about that. I think it's very private. I don't really know what the answer is. You have to be compelled by something inner, I think. And it's a real push. I sometimes describe it as physical, and it sometimes can be. I mean, it's something that's really gnawing at you inside. And you need some release. That doesn't mean it's going to come out perfect or whatever, but I think it's not an intellectual thing. Oh, I want to write about this topic. I think it's much more entwined with feeling. A kind of it's not that it's without ideas, but it's a hard. It's funny. It's hard to describe the beginnings, and it's hard to describe the end.
Well, that was it. That was my other question, of course. Like, how do you know when you're done?
Well, this is one of my favorite stories. I read this memoir by somebody who knew the Italian sculptor Giacometti. You know, he did those thin sculptures. And somebody said to him, how do you know when the sculpture is finished? And he said, which I love this. He said, oh, I never finish any of my sculptures. I just abandon them. And and that's sort of, it's not, I don't feel exactly that, but I do feel that I reach a point where I say to myself, this poem may not be finished, but I'm finished with it. You know, I'm done working on it. It may not be perfect, and probably not, but I just can't do it anymore. Or if I'm ever going to have a life or go on to the next thing, because you could really, somebody told me that, one of her facilitators in her workshops, when somebody said, how do you know when do you have the final draft? And she said, when you die.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, I am a person who really holds on a long time. I'm very conscious of it. I don't send it out right away. Putting together this last section, now some of them had been written earlier, but there was a lot of new stuff. That's the fastest in my whole life that I've ever dealt with my work. And there was one piece in there that I still was changing 3 times before they already had it. It was already typeset, and I was still changing it. I like to sit on something for 3 or 4 months at least, if not longer, to see what it's like when I totally forget about it, and then I come back to it and see it sort of cold. You don't really know. I mean, I think you have to decide this is really good enough for me, not for other people. For me, it's good enough, and I need to move on.
Yeah, yeah. I think one of the things that's so incredible about this collection is the ways that the themes resonate in different ways as you're writing them at different times in your life. Of course, the obvious one is grief, right? Because in the later poems, you have this have grief around contemporaries and this very interpersonal grief. Um, that's different than in the early poems. Were there other discoveries as you like, because this is really your poetic life work, right?
Yeah.
Gathered in this page. Were there other discoveries or things that surprised you in putting it together?
Well, what was it? I think the most interesting moments was when I had to proofread starting from the very, very beginning. And I was reading material that I wrote in 1971. And I felt, not in terms of the material, but in thinking about the piece, I felt totally disconnected because I really didn't remember how I mean, I remembered the final thing that had been published, but I didn't remember how I got to it. I mean, I just didn't remember anything about them. So it was a strange thing. I think, it's very hard because most of us, I think, repeat because, I mean, how many of us don't go back to our childhood or rewrite the same scene or, from like one time when you're 25 and the next time when you're 45, you see it very differently or it's more nuanced in a different way. So I think what's for me unfortunate is that my childhood is very much connected with the war. So the war keeps coming back. And it's not because I'm obsessed with it, but it's just when I think back on my childhood, it's just there. I
Mhm,
can't I can't do away with it, you know?
mhm,
Um,
mhm,
and I mean, there was a time when I first started writing when I thought the only thing I could write about was the Holocaust. And and it was when I really came out that I suddenly realized I had a life in the present and that in a very real way, that I had suddenly I had other things to write about. Now, I was kind of disappointed in myself when I came back to it, but then I realized, it's always going to come back because it's never going to disappear, sort of as my life history. So I felt all right about it. I mean, you just develop and you do. I'm still writing material about Judy's death. I mean, and it's been 8 years, and a lot of the poems were written right after she died. So you see things differently and you come back to it. Um, it's interesting. I mean, it's really interesting it's like the journal you didn't keep. It's a different kind of journal, you know? You
mhm,
you go back and you see what was going on in 1985.
mhm.
And, you know, it's, it's revealing. It's sort of, you think you know yourself. And the other thing I think, I don't know whether you've had this experience or other people have that. I sometimes think I discover something about myself, an insight about myself. And then I read something that I wrote 20 years ago and I had that insight then, but I totally forgot about it.
Yeah,
Has that happened to you?
yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah.
such a strange thing. You think, oh, now I understand, but I understood it 20 years ago and I forgot about it.
Right, right. But it does feel like it's layered. Like there was the understanding, and then there's like it hits in a different way with the 20
Ex-
years of experience.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the other thing that is so interesting reading this book is kind of the circling around of themes that you're working with throughout your life, but also the ways that particular communities are really visible in this work. And they're the communities that kind of lifted up and supported your writing, but also where you found voice. And there's this kind of back and forth. I think, you talk about when you were coming out. So lesbian and feminist communities, but also activist communities, um, Yiddish-speaking communities. Like there's all of these different kind of layers that you are in conversation with, and there's a real sort of communal sense in the poems. And I wonder what you make of that, kind of what insights you have about communities looking back now on the 60 years of this work.
I think community, I mean, I think where you are in your life at a particular time and the kind of writing you do at that moment is very, very connected. I mean, for example, there's a poem in the early part of the book called "They Did Not Build Wings for Them," and it's about single women, and it's very, when I read it now, it's very romantic. I mean, it ends with her bearing her breasts to the moon. I mean, I consider this the quintessential second wave poem, feminist poem, kind of. But I would have never written that poem in another context. I mean, there was like something fed that. And I think that happens all the time. And I think one of the things that happens for me is that I do move in different communities that aren't always connected.
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel this, like tomorrow I'm doing a reading at YIVO, which is going to be a completely different reading than I'm doing tonight. And that sort of disturbs me because it feels like I have to sort of, I don't know. I mean, it's like, I wish it were more, I mean, I feel integrated. I don't feel chopped up, but when I have to put a reading together, it doesn't feel that integrated. It feels like there are these compartments. And with some things like Etliche Wertek, I can bridge sort of gay stuff, feminist stuff, and Yiddish, but that doesn't always happen. And some things are just in themselves, kind of in one, and it's not that it's not understood by other communities. It is, except that it's just, it's either more familiar or it's grounded in a particular group. It doesn't mean it's inaccessible to others. I'm hoping all my work is accessible to everybody. But I think some people, and it's the same thing with the reader. The reader brings something. I mean, the reader's not blank.
Mm-hmm.
And somebody who knows Yiddish might respond very differently to Etliche Wertek than someone who doesn't know,
Yeah.
So it's where I'm at during a particular time and what I'm doing. I mean, that's why I think even some of the activism, for example, about Israel and Palestine came into my poetry because that's what I was doing.
Yeah.
That's where I was focused. That's where I was grounded. So it changes.
Judith Clark in the chat put it really, I think perfectly. She said, "You are a border crosser." And I think you are kind of moving around, but and it's not only, I don't think of it as compartmentalization, but you're in conversation with this group of people, and then you go to another group and you hear what they're talking about, and you say, "Oh, and these people are talking about this," and you're making these kind of connections among us where we don't always see those connections ourselves.
The other thing I think that's true about readings, and you know this too. There are certain poems you just don't read, not because they're X-rated but because they're just either too long or they're too convoluted in some way, and they're really great to read on a page, but they're not great to read out loud. And I have some poems that are actually easy to read, but they're very long, and I don't like to read, like I have my work sonnets. I mean, or even Bashert, which is like almost 15 pages. I'm not going to read the whole thing unless it's going to take up the whole evening, and I'm not sure. Well, my work sonnets are very long. I mean, and I never read them, So I don't know what it's sort of hard. It's hard to decide I really agonize sometimes over putting together a list of what to read and also how to bridge it from place to place.
Yeah. Well, tonight was beautiful and perfect in every way. People are chiming in that Bashert changed their life, that it's always with them. Tell me, Irena, what's inspiring you today? What's giving you joy and inspiration?
Well, I think what's giving me, well, first of all, I have to say, let me just say this. I'm not super optimistic about the world. Let me start with that. Not before I get joyous. I'm just not very optimistic. However, despite that, I think what this is going to sound really corny, but first of all, I know some young people, and I'm so impressed by. I've been in touch with some students from Barnard, that were there when I was teaching. I'm so impressed with what they're doing with their lives. These are committed young people who are taking on different kinds of professions that all have to do with getting things better, making things better for people. Let me put it that way. And I'm very impressed by that. I'm impressed by the fact that there are people that still want to write poetry, despite why do people want to write poetry? I don't know in this world right now. And I think there's a younger generation that, for me, is really important to kind of stay in touch with, because they are the people that you kind of count on, and they are inspiring. They're inspiring in their idealism. They're not totally up in the clouds. They know what they're up against. They're not pretending, but they're determined, and they create both social things and artistic things, and that's always great. And I have to say also that I get about 4 poems every morning in my email box, or whatever it's called, inbox. And I like reading. I mean, they sort of, even if I'm sort of down, it's really nice to read a few poems in the morning and get you going. I mean, I'm very nervous to find out what's going on in Georgia, but I guess we all are. But
yeah, and we have people from your younger generation in the chat. One, Rosa Danielle Lang says, a lot of us wouldn't be queer Yiddishists. We are without you. And Jill Janofsky, who was a student of yours from the Barnard class of 2010, is here as well. And I'm sure there are others. Any other, so I want to add, because there was some chat about this, the book is available. It's in stock at Karis. You can order it through the link. If you order through Karis, you will get a signed copy. There was an issue with the link early on. That's all resolved now. So please do order a copy from Karis. My buddy Yeva said she bought the copy through Yivo for tomorrow night and is buying one through Karis to give as a Hanukkah gift. So follow Yeva's good example. Shelley says that, Irena, you gave me a way to be at home as a lesbian poet and a proud Jew. So just lots of love of people doing this. And it's so wonderful to have this thick, juicy book with your work, and especially the new work.
I just want to say to this audience that it's Julie's fault that the book is out, because Julie did all the work. She's responsible. And I'm not kidding. I just briefly want to say that I did show Julie, I had a manuscript and I showed it to her, and she said, oh, Wesleyan should see it. So I sent it to Wesleyan, and Wesleyan said it's too short. So I went back to Julie and said, they said it's too short. She said, well, put it together with everything. And she helped me with writing letters and telling, because I don't know what to do. I mean, I'm just a dope with some of these things. And she really put it together. And Rachel Levitsky was very much an encourager in this, but it was by myself, it would have never come out. It just would have. So thank Julie, because she was great.
Well, that's why we don't just go through this world by ourselves. We do it with friends and in community, and like making the righteous things happen that should. So,
well, Julie is very much in the spirit. I mean, if you look at my acknowledgments, I acknowledge basically all the women that had women's bookstores and print and distributions. And that's how my book, I mean, this is the first time I'm not being published by a feminist or a lesbian press. All my previous work was always published by women, lesbians presses. And the only thing, including like the Tribe of Dinah, was first published as in the Sinister Wisdom double issue, and then it was picked up by Beacon. But my books, all of them stayed in the women's kind of circulation. And this is the first time that I never thought I'd be published by a university press. So it's Julie's fault.
Mm-hmm. I'll take all of the blame for that. Yeah. No, it was, and I think that's one of the, but I think one of the visions of some of the women's presses, not all of them, but some of them, was to really create openings in other spaces for the voices to be in other rooms, and that's really happening with your work, and it's really beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you to everyone for joining us tonight. Again, the book is Her Birth and Later Years, New and Collected Poems, 1971 to 2021. It's from Wesleyan University Press. You can buy it from Karis Books and More and have a signed nameplate signed by Irena in the book. Order it this evening or anytime over the next 24 hours. The link is right below our image on the thing. Thank you. I don't know if you want to come in or if you want me to just wrap up and say thank you to Karis Books and More and all of the amazing work that they do. Thank you to the Lesbian History Archives, which also helped promote this and does wonderful work for our community. Thank you to Sinister Wisdom. I see lots of Sinister Wisdom friends and supporters in the chat. It's magical, and good luck to you, Irena, as this book makes its way out to readers who are welcoming it back into their lives and new readers who will be discovering you for the first time.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for coming.
Thank you all both. Thank you, Julie, for making this happen. And I just want to let folks know this will be available for immediate rewatch. If there's anybody that wanted to watch it, they can just watch it on this same platform. Just hit play if you want to rewatch it again. It's also going to be up on Karis Circle on our YouTube, which is just youtube.com/Karis Circle, and up on Sinister Wisdom's YouTube. So you'll have lots of places that you can rewatch this for free as many times as you want, and ideally share it with friends who you would love to have be in this room with us. So again, thank you to Lesbian History Archives. Thank you to Sinister Wisdom. Thank you always to Julie for all that you do for our communities. And thank you, Irena. This has been such a gift. So I wish you all the health and happiness in the world. And to everybody with us tonight, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ciao.